Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran. This is episode 33 of season 1, History from the early medieval period. Today, we are at the end of the 10th century, with the Cholas having just ended the Ganga rule, unbroken for more than 600 years. Their takeover of the Gangavadi looked like it was part of a plan they had to invade parts of the southern Deccan with one objective in mind, and that is to control the trade routes. Now, barring some holdout states, the Cholas had conquered a great part of the south, to the extent that it is easier to list out which nations had not fallen into their sweep. Today, we will take a look at the beginnings of this astonishing empire's impact on the Deccan. But first, I would be remiss if I did not thank my patrons, the Prestige Group, with whose support the History of Bangalore podcast becomes possible. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. Right, let's get the show on the road. The Cholas. What were they doing here? Why did Rajaraja Chola invade and take over Talakadu? What did he want with this small kingdom that had been no more than junior allies of larger kingdoms of the Deccan? It is an interesting question, the answer to which lies in geography. Now, the strategic importance of the Deccan cannot be overstated. If you look at the map of, let's call it the Mysore Deccan, you'll see that the area is loosely at the geographical middle of the south, and for this reason, it's a place where all the trade routes connected. Trade routes. This is why Bangalore exists today. Any understanding of our region's history would be without foundation if we did not also understand the reason that we have a history, and that reason is trade. Other than for the trade routes, it would be hard to find another reason for the city and the region to have become as important as they are today. Ancient trade routes reveal how early societies worked. Geography shaped the paths, the rivers, the mountains, the deserts, decided where goods could travel. Political stability therefore mattered too. Safe routes meant thriving trade, while unrest made everything risky. As empires rose and fell, old routes faded and new ones took their place, keeping the flow of goods, cultures, and ideas alive. Now, let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit more about trade routes. The Mysore Deccan has long been at the crossroads of trade. It connected ancient routes, sea routes, like the Dakshinapatha and the Indian Ocean trade networks. On these routes, goods like silks and spices would be imported from the Far East, arrive at the old Tamragam ports like Arikamedu, and then be transported across the south to the west coast ports like Muziris, and then placed on ships bound for the Middle East and eventually Europe, specifically Rome. The practice of transporting goods overland across the Deccan continued even after they were sailing around the south of India, around the Cape near Sinhala. All the goods didn't just go from coast to coast, some of them stayed within the subcontinent. They had a market among the wealthy, the royalty, the aristocracy, the merchants, and more. And these local markets were both across the Deccan and across the Vindhyas towards the north. Now, we talked about imports from the east, but the trade happened in the other direction too. A look at the bill of lading on these ships would have yielded some exciting entries. The goods inwards that landed at the west coast ports were Roman treasures from their world: glassware, perfumes, printed cloth, silverware, gemstones, and importantly, the red coral of the Mediterranean. Now, glass, gems, and perfumes were baubles, but for Indians, coral wasn't just beautiful, it was believed to hold mystical powers. So here was the irony of the Romans exporting items of mysticism to India. Pliny the Elder, the Roman senator, and one of the world's earliest historians, wrote in his book Natural History, Indian soothsayers and seers believe that coral is potent as a charm for warding off dangers. Accordingly, they delight in its beauty and religious power. Later, Pliny was less smitten by India when he complained loudly that Roman women were delighting in the goods imported from India and emptying the Roman treasury to India for their vanity, amounting to millions of sesterces. Now, where did the goods that they exported from the ports go? Recent finds show the presence of all sorts of goods and artifacts that must have been sourced from the West, brought here by Indian merchants who would take the Roman goods across the waters of the Bay of Bengal, right near Indonesia and that neighborhood. Objects of desire, ranging from aromatic fish sauce, it's called garam, to items of home decor like vases and statuettes, all of them found their way across the seas. These Western goods landed on the west coast of India, and they were transported overland to the east coast and on ships bound east. And cargo moved in the opposite direction as well. Imports from Southeast Asia and China landed on the east coast ports, moved across land to the west coast ports for re-export. Now, while moving the goods between the coasts, the goods would have been loaded on bullock carts and walked across the Deccan. These roads were the lifelines of trade, and these were the trade routes of the Deccan. For the early medieval Deccan kingdoms, this trade presented the opportunity for a source of revenue for the treasury from taxes, such as what we might call octroi and duties, as the goods passed through their kingdoms. Taxes were collected at gates, at ports and market towns, the crossroads where merchants passed with their wares. These levies or taxes were called sulka or beti, and they were based on the type, the quantity, or the value of the goods. And unless the traders were exempt from tax, say if the goods that they were carrying were connected to temples or had royal backing in some way, they all paid taxes. That plus fees for services, protection from bandits being an important one. Now, as the trade happened over there, the kings started to see that they could actually enhance their profits by directly engaging in trade. And the kings of the Deccan built their wealth and their treasury in all these ways. The money was then used for administration and infrastructure, grants and charities, and of course, building offensive and defensive military capabilities. For the coastal kingdoms, the ones who owned the ports, such capabilities needed to include a decent naval force to protect the precious cargo vessels from pirates. There are very interesting research papers on piracy in the seas around India, right from 1 AD. This is principally how these empires, from the Satavahanas in the pre- and early Christian era, right down to the Vijayanagaram kingdoms in 16th century, thrived. These trade routes was their principal lifeline, their link to wealth and cultural influences. Places like Begur and Hebbal, to name only two, and there were many others, were rest stops on the highways between the east and the west coast ports. Now, these were located at the confluence of rivers, of roads, and therefore of culture and ideas. And the traders who arrived there were from anywhere that traded with the south. Arab sailors and merchants, Greek and Roman traders and manufacturers, and judging by the discovery of fragments of a legal contract between traders and usurers, lawyers, or whatever they were called back then. An evening in Begur or Hebbal by the campfire must have been exciting, given the presence of so many people from so many places, each bringing their own religion and culture and customs and stories to the campfire. Exposure to culture and new ideas broadens minds, and that's what trade does. It brings cultures together. And the exposure to diverse cultures defeats insularity, influences how people think, and shapes local tradition in remarkable ways for generations. Everyone is curious, in a good way, about the next guy and about learning about new places and customs. And this was what the area around Bangalore must have been like. Evidence of this multicultural mindset exists even today, and it is a part of Bangalore. I am describing the society in which I was raised. Growing up, I sensed little to no judgment about how someone else led their life, no matter how hilarious their life choices seemed. Being located at the confluence of trade routes must have made the region both strategic and desirable, and it became increasingly clear that the reason for the power and wealth of the local kingdoms, like the Gangas, was because of their ownership of these highways. There is documented evidence that they had income from taxing agriculture and land, but really it was trade that presented the great opportunities. The fortunes of the Deccan kingdoms between the two coasts depended on how international trade was doing at the time. The ebb and flow of their income matched the ebb and flow of international trade. Now, by the early 11th century, Gangavadi was famous. The area had become an important center for trade, and public projects like the giant Gomateshwara statue would have attracted a great deal of attention from all kingdoms. Right around then, towards the end of the 10th century, there was the rise of one man who inspired a lot of history and later terrible movies, Rajaraja Chola. Now, the Cholas were known for their superior thalassocratic or maritime abilities for both trade and military, and therefore for them, since they already controlled the eastern board, access to the western ports, which were then controlled by the Cholas, would have been of paramount importance to control the trade. And equally, what lay between the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea was the Deccan, and on it, the Gangavadi, at the heart of the trade routes that connected the eastern and the western seaboard. Now, controlling every step of the journey appeared to have been Rajaraja's goal, and by the order of things in the day, he set about annexing everything he could in his path. And in a time of weak Ganga kings, the acquisition of the highly valuable Gangavadi posed little challenge to Rajaraja. When I returned from this commercial break, the rise of Rajaraja Chola and the takeover of the south, and this will help us get a better understanding of our own history and why I think that almost all of the history of the Bangalore, the Talakadu area, is related to trade. Right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
Hi, I'm back and moving ahead with the story. Rajaraja Chola, indeed the Cholas in general, were no strangers to the Gangas. The Cholas and the Gangas had matrimonial ties. Sri Vikrama, the Ganga king, had married a Chola princess, for example. Now, how powerful the Cholas were at that time, 7th century, is moot because they were still in their 600-year interregnum. They probably were ruling over a small principality, but still, they were royalty. The Ganga king, Bhuvikrama, was born of this union. Kingdoms of the Deccan were always getting into and out of others' businesses, and alliances were made and broken, so, in general, there were no strangers here in the Deccan. The method in Rajaraja's conquest of the south bears out my surmise that his principal reason for conquering the south was to control everything about trade, the ports, the routes, all of it. And since the Cholas were already in control of the eastern ports, and Rajaraja set his sights on the lucrative western ports, as I said before, he embarked on a campaign against both the Pandyas, ruled by the king Amarabhujanga at Madurai, and then the Chera kingdom, which was being ruled by the local king Ravivarman Tiruvadi. Now let's talk about the campaign and the conquest. First, Rajaraja marched upon the Pandyan capital Madurai and defeated Amarabhujanga. And then he marched south for about 150 kilometers through the Tirunelveli district, which led to one of the many passes in the Western Ghats. And this one was probably the Thenmala, judging by the map. And it gave him a clear shot at Kerala, where he successfully achieved his ends and subjugated Ravivarman Tiruvadi in his capital of Kollam in Kerala. Now this effectively gave Rajaraja the east, the south, and the west. Then a bloody campaign against the Vengi Chalukyas set into motion the takeover of the areas north of the Gangavadi and to the west of the Chola territories. And then there was the beginning of a campaign against the Nolambas. Now the Nolambas traditionally ruled the Tumakuru areas, and their kingdom, the Nolambavadi, bordered the Gangavadi. Now because the Nolambas, having already suffered a loss of good parts of their kingdom to the Gangas, gave in quite easily and joined the Cholas in their campaign as their vassals. There was a theory published about this, and I will talk about this a little later in this episode. And then Rajaraja sent his son and his heir, Rajendra Chola, to attack the Gangavadi. And by 1004 AD, the last Ganga king Rakasa had been turned into a feudatory of Rajendra. Now, as a matter of note, even by 992 AD, and that was in the 7th year of Rajaraja's reign, a Chola army unit had captured some of the northern parts of the Ganga kingdom. So when Talakadu fell to Rajendra in 1004, everyone pretty much knew it was going to happen. There was a battle, the Battle of Talakadu. The combatants were Rajendra Chola and Rakasa Ganga. Rakasa did not stand a chance. The Battle of Talakadu, though, was a watershed moment in history, and it marked the end of nearly 700 years of rule by the Gangas. But details about this battle are scanty. We don't know how the battle was fought and how many troops were involved. Inscriptions only mention that Rajendra Chola fought Rakasa Ganga in 1004 AD and that Rajendra captured Talakadu, the Ganga capital. And even if this was not much of a battle, it earned Rajendra the title Gangaikonda Chola for this remarkable conquest of a long-standing dynasty. And as for the Gangas, the fall of their capital spelt the fall of the entire dynasty and the complete surrender and subjugation of Rakasa Ganga for what little that was worth. After the fall of Talakadu, Rajaraja's campaign continued. The Cholas had taken over places like Arkalgud, Srirangapatna and Nelamangala. These were all captured and brought under their control. And then the campaign went deep into the west coast, into Malenadu in the western hills, and then the rest of the Nolambavadi in the region, south towards the Kongu provinces of Coimbatore and Salem, west into Tuluva and the Konkan coast. These were all subdued by the Cholas with astonishing speed. Now here, I must pause to address another curious event in the records, a reference to a place called Thadigaipadi. Now, Rajaraja's invasion was described as the takeover of Gangapadi, Nolambapadi and Thadigaipadi on Tamil inscriptions. Now, this begs the question, where was this Thadigaipadi? And the answer to that question unlocks a little of the history of the Bangalore region itself and changes some ideas as to how much of Bangalore came under the Nolambas and not the Gangas. Now, Thadigaipadi has been referred to by various names, both by the Kannada inscriptions and the Tamil inscriptions, but the local dialect in Kannada has it as Dadigavadi, and this refers to one of the brothers, Madhava and Dadiga, who founded the Ganga dynasty. And it was Dadika's son who succeeded Madhava and continued the Ganga lineage. Now, the name Dadigavadi came to us from the work of Benjamin Lewis Rice. It was on an inscription found at Koppa on the Shimsha River. It was referred to as Dadiganakere or Dadiga's lake. But the curiosity lies in the Chola inscription making a specific reference to Dadigavadi in addition to Gangavadi and Nolambavadi as places they conquered. So the logical conclusion was that Dadigavadi was an established part of the general Gangavadi area connected to Mysore Talakadu. But in reality, its boundaries likely ran along the Shimsha River to the east, the Kaveri to the south, and the Hemavati to the west. The northern edge seemed to have followed the present-day borders of Krishnarajapeta and Nagamangala taluks, and meeting the Shimsha near Nellikere. So the area roughly matches today's Krishnarajapeta, Nagamangala, Mandya, Srirangapatna, and the Malavalli taluks. That's quite an area for a kingdom that we had no idea was described as Dadigavadi. And then more information pieced together from inscriptions revealed that in the 10th century, Nolambavadi not only covered Tumakuru and Chitradurga as we all thought, but much of Bangalore, Kolar, Bellari, and even parts of Salem and North Arcot. This shows the Nolamba's significance and their role in South Indian politics, and this changes things about what was popularly assumed to be either the Ganga or Nolamba territories. And given all that, now it leads us to the rather inescapable question of what was the Nolamba position in respect of Rajaraja Chola's invasion. And the answer to that appears to be that they most likely provided active assistance to the Cholas. The appearance of two people with the title Nolambadi Raja, who served as Chola generals, should shout clues about where their loyalties lay. By one theory, the Nolambas had turned against their Ganga overlords and sided with the Cholas openly or definitely in some material way. And pretty soon, the Cholas owned the south. Where did it go from here? There is not much said about any Chola campaigns in other parts of India. No statements of ambition about wanting to conquer lands north of the Vindhyas. And judging from military campaigns they conducted, and comparing that to the campaigns of the previous Deccan kingdoms, the Cholas could have easily expanded their kingdom to greater and greater land masses. But they didn't, because it seemed that their plan of action and their goal was controlling trade and commerce and not an ego-driven political agenda for expansion's sake. And maybe because they had a rather pragmatic and practical reason for their campaigns and conquests, and not something that was driven by over-the-top politics or personalities, tales from their history that are told about their kingdoms become impersonal and distant when the Cholas were ruling the south. And from Rajaraja's time, there was another change. The history that was told on inscriptions started to become more about the work or the grant or the public works projects being described, and less about endless poetic praise about the king and his lineage. This was a break from that old style of prashasti that had been ordained by the Dharma Shastras, and things moved more into a pragmatic record of replacing the litany of praise about the royal lineage with a litany of the background and history of the actual work being described. From a variety of accounts from the books of historians like Malini Adiga, Burtonstein, Nilakanta Shastri, Sheikh Ali, and others, it comes across overwhelmingly that the importance of the message on the Chola inscriptions started to become less whimsical, less personality-driven, and more about administration. It's important to know this because, for one thing, the unsentimental and hard-nosed effort to make administration less about what I call whimsical politics is something that we readily understand today as a virtue in politics and administration. And for the other matter, such changes in the way things were run tended to have a lasting impact on history, which continues right to the present day. And for this reason, it would be a good idea to focus on the administrative capabilities of the Cholas. To that end, the next episode will continue where I leave you now with more details to follow on administrative matters and the culture of the Cholas and how they integrated themselves into the Gangavadi and indeed across the south. But for now, with the conquest of the entire south, Rajaraja's goal of controlling everything to do with trade routes had been achieved. And I will bring you the next episode as soon as I can to walk you through the century of the Chola rule of the region. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.